The hum of the server farm was the only lullaby Leo Vance had known for 3 years. It was a constant, soothing thrum, the sound of his and Julian's shared dream breathing. In their cramped Palo Alto garage, surrounded by whiteboards covered in frantic equations and a floor littered with empty pizza boxes, they had forged Aura. It wasn't just a company. It was a promise. A promise to overlay the digital world onto the real one, not with clunky glasses or intrusive pop-ups, but with a whisper of light and data fed directly into the optic nerve via a sleek, nearly invisible neuroband. Leo, the introverted prodigy, built the engine. Julian Croft, his charismatic, silver-tongued other half, built the chassis and sold it to the world. They were two sides of the same coin, inseparable since they were kids trading comic books over a rickety fence. Leo saw the world in lines of code and quantum possibilities. Julian saw it in market shares and leverage points. "You make the magic, Leo," Julian would say, slinging an arm over his shoulder. "I'll make sure the world pays to see the show." And Leo trusted him. Implicitly. The first crack in their universe was a hairline fracture, easily ignored. A key patent document that Leo was too busy to read thoroughly, which Julian assured him was standard boilerplate. A few meetings with investors that Julian handled, so you can stay in the zone, buddy. Leo, lost in the sublime beauty of refining his neural lace algorithm, barely noticed. He was an artist, and Julian was his curator, his protector. Or so he thought. The betrayal, when it came, wasn't a sudden stab but a slow, systemic poisoning. It began with whispers Julian seeded among the board members about Leo's erratic focus and creative volatility. Then came the accidental leak of an unstable prototype to a tech blog, a disaster that sent their stock tumbling. Julian, feigning devastation, presented it as a tragic consequence of Leo's carelessness. The final act was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Julian convened an emergency board meeting. With crocodile tears in his eyes, he invoked a clause in their partnership agreement, a clause buried in the very document Leo had signed without reading, that allowed for the forced buyout of a partner deemed a fiduciary liability. It was clean, legal, and utterly brutal. Leo was painted as the tragic Icarus, the genius who flew too close to the sun. Julian was the stoic hero, salvaging their dream from the wreckage. Leo sat in the sterile conference room, the world dissolving into a haze of static. He was voted out of his own company, his shares bought for a pittance based on the manufactured stock plunge. Julian, his lifelong friend, wouldn't even meet his gaze. He simply slid a severance check across the polished mahogany table. "It's for the best, Leo," he'd murmured, his voice thick with a performance of regret. That night, Leo Vance went home, packed a single bag, and vanished. He left behind his apartment, his work, his name. To the world, and to Julian Croft, he was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in Silicon Valley. For 7 years, Leo Vance was dead. He was buried in the mud of the Mekong Delta, scorched by the sun of the Gobi, and frozen in the Siberian winter. He shed his identity like a snake sheds its skin, working on fishing trawlers, as a roughneck on oil rigs, and as a ghost programmer for shadowy syndicates in Eastern Europe. The grief and shock that had initially numbed him slowly calcified into something harder, colder. A diamond of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized Julian hadn't just been cruel, he had been brilliant. He had used the systems of law, finance, and public perception as weapons. A lesser man would have sought simple vengeance, a fistfight, a public denouncement. But Leo understood that to beat Julian, he couldn't just tear down the temple. He had to become the new god. In a dusty, book-filled apartment in Prague, Leo began his resurrection. He devoured texts on corporate law, high-frequency trading, and behavioral psychology. He learned the art of social engineering from a former Mossad agent and the intricacies of untraceable digital finance from a Russian hacktivist. The soft, idealistic dreamer was meticulously carved away, leaving behind a man of sharp angles and singular purpose. He needed a new face, a new name. He became Silas Vane. The transformation was total. He allowed his hair to gray naturally at the temples, a distinguished look he cultivated. He adopted a regimen of fasting and brutal exercise that stripped the last vestiges of youthful softness from his face, leaving behind sharp cheekbones and a hollow intensity in his eyes. He wore bespoke suits tailored in Savile Row, learned to speak with a faint, unplaceable mid-Atlantic accent, and wore custom contact lenses that shifted his hazel eyes to a glacial blue. Leo Vance slouched, a product of years hunched over a keyboard. Silas Vane stood with the unshakable posture of a man who owned every room he entered. With the money he'd earned and shrewdly invested from his shadowy programming work, Silas began to build his own ghost empire. A labyrinthine network of shell corporations, from the Cayman Islands to Liechtenstein, all funneling into a central investment firm, Janus Aegis. He was a whisper in the financial world, a phantom who made impossibly prescient moves, acquiring controlling stakes in companies that supplied essential microcomponents to his ultimate target. Julian Croft, meanwhile, had ascended from tech CEO to global icon. Aura had been rebranded as Croft Industries, its neurotechnology woven into the fabric of society. Julian was on the cover of magazines, a lauded philanthropist, the visionary who had single-handedly guided humanity into a new era of augmented reality. He was arrogant, untouchable, and had long forgotten the ghost of his former friend. He was about to be haunted. Silas Vane's assault on Croft Industries was a campaign of 1,000 cuts, each one too small to be noticed, but collectively designed to bleed the giant. He began by manipulating the periphery. His first target was Marcus Thorne, Julian's notoriously ambitious chief financial officer. Silas, through an anonymous encrypted channel, fed Thorne a piece of information. A small, overlooked logistics company in Singapore was about to be awarded a massive government contract to develop drone shipping lanes. The information was genuine, acquired through Silas's own intelligence network. Thorne, smelling a career-making opportunity, convinced Julian to acquire the company for a song. When the contract was announced weeks later, Croft Industries' stock soared, and Thorne became Julian's golden boy. Thorne was now unknowingly indebted to a mysterious benefactor, a phantom source he would trust implicitly in the future.
Next was Alistair Finch, the head of security, a man with an expensive lifestyle and a hidden, crippling gambling addiction. Silas didn't blackmail him. That was too crude. Instead, he engineered a series of lucky breaks. An anonymous tip on a long-shot horse race that paid out handsomely. A suggestion to bet against a certain stock that then cratered. Finch, believing he had a guardian angel or an infallible instinct, grew bolder, his personal security protocols becoming lax as his arrogance swelled. He felt invincible, a fatal flaw for a man guarding a fortress. Silas's strategy was insidious. He wasn't creating traitors. He was nurturing the inherent weaknesses of the men Julian surrounded himself with. He was turning Julian's own criteria for hiring, ruthless ambition, against him. With the key players compromised, Silas prepared his masterstroke, the Trojan horse. Under the banner of a boutique Swiss research firm, another Janus Aegis holding, he unveiled Prometheus, a predictive AI algorithm. It was presented as the holy grail of corporate strategy, an AI capable of modeling geopolitical and market shifts with 98% accuracy. It was a lie, of course, a beautiful, irresistible lie. The truth was far more elegant. Prometheus was indeed a revolutionary piece of software, but its true genius lay not in prediction, but in infiltration. It was built upon Leo's earliest, most theoretical work, concepts in quantum computing he had never even shared with Julian. The AI's core logic operated via quantum-entangled particles. Once installed on a host server, it would create an unbreakable, untraceable link to its counterpart, which sat in Silas's server farm in a decommissioned bunker in Iceland. It wasn't a backdoor. It was a parallel dimension. No firewall could detect it, no security scan could find it, because by the time the data was examined, it was already somewhere else. As expected, Julian Croft had to have it. The idea that someone else possessed a strategic tool he did not was anathema to him. He dispatched Marcus Thorne to acquire Prometheus at any cost. Silas, as the reclusive, eccentric owner of the Swiss firm, played his part to perfection. He feigned reluctance, driving the price to astronomical heights. He made Julian desperate, forcing him to liquidate other assets and take on significant debt to finance the acquisition. Julian, blinded by hubris, saw it as the ultimate power move, the final piece of his global empire. The day the deal was signed, Julian threw a lavish party. As champagne flowed and a string quartet played, deep within the central servers of Croft Industries, Prometheus came online. For Silas, it was like a phantom limb he hadn't felt in 7 years had suddenly reconnected. He had access to everything. Every email Julian had ever sent. Every doctored financial record from the early days of Aura. Every secret offshore account. He saw the cold, calculated messages between Julian and his lawyers plotting his ouster. He saw it all. He had the proof. He had the weapon. Now all he needed was the stage. The Arcadian Theatre was a monument to Julian Croft's ego. A gleaming structure of glass and steel, it was the venue for the 10-year anniversary gala of Croft Industries. A celebration not of the company, but of its singular, visionary leader. The event was being broadcast live across the globe. The world's elite, politicians, celebrities and power brokers, were in attendance, all there to pay fealty. Julian stood on stage, bathed in a reverent spotlight. He was in his element, a sermonizing tech messiah recounting his heroic journey. And while the road was difficult, while there were those who lacked the vision, who faltered along the way, he said, a subtle sanctimonious dig at the ghost of Leo Vance, we persevered. We built a new world. In his Icelandic bunker, Silas Vane sat before a console, his face illuminated by the glow of a dozen monitors. It was time. With a single keystroke, he initiated the final sequence. On the stage behind Julian, the massive screen displaying the Croft Industries logo flickered. It went black for a second, then lit up with a new face. It was the face of Silas Vane, his glacial blue eyes staring out at the stunned audience. Good evening. Silas's voice boomed through the theater's perfect sound system, calm and clear as a winter morning. Julian spun around, his face a mask of confusion and fury. Who the hell is this? Finch. Get him off the screen. But Alistair Finch was preoccupied. A message had just appeared on his personal tablet, a complete record of his illicit gambling wins and the corresponding IP addresses of the anonymous tipster, alongside evidence that he'd bypassed security protocols to pay off his debts. His blood ran cold. My apologies for the interruption, Julian, Silas continued, his voice resonating with an unnerving familiarity. But an anniversary is a time for reflection, a time to remember old friends. On the screen, Silas raised a hand to his face. He removed the contact lenses, revealing the warm, hazel eyes Julian hadn't seen in a decade. He slicked his graying hair back in a different style, and with the subtle shift in posture, the ghost materialized. The face on the screen was older, harder, but it was unmistakably Leo Vance. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Julian stumbled back, his face ashen. Leo. No. You're dead. Not dead, Leo corrected. Just upgraded. You see, Julian, you taught me a valuable lesson. You taught me that the most elegant code isn't written for a machine. It's written for people. Then, the evidence began to cascade across the screen. The original Aura partnership agreement, side by side with the doctored version Julian had tricked him into signing. The hidden clause was highlighted in blood red. Next, a web of financial transactions, flowing from Aura's early accounts into a series of offshore shells, all leading to a single master account in Julian's name. The siphoned millions, meticulously documented. Then the emails. Uncrypted conversations between Julian and his legal team, callously planning the smear campaign, the manufactured crisis, the hostile takeover. We need to frame it as a rescue, one of Julian's emails read. Leo is the tragic genius. I am the reluctant savior. The narrative is everything. The audience watched, wrapped in horrified silence. This wasn't just a corporate dispute. It was the public execution of a king. But the past is the past, Leo said, a cold smile touching his lips. Let's talk about the present. The screen split. On one side, a live feed showed the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange in chaos as Croft Industries stock flatlined. On the other, a dizzying list of transactions showed Prometheus, the prized AI, liquidating every single one of Julian Croft's personal and corporate assets, converting them to untraceable cryptocurrency, and wiring them to hundreds of charities and NGOs around the world. Your predictive AI is quite effective, Leo noted drily. It predicted that you, Julian, were the single greatest liability to the company's future. He wasn't finished. He brought up Marcus Thorne's file, displaying the insider information he'd been fed and the illegal trades he'd made based on it. He showed Alistair Finch's gambling records and the security breaches he'd facilitated. In an instant, Julian's inner circle was not just exposed, but implicated. His pillars of support crumbled into dust. On stage, Julian Croft was a man hollowed out. His empire, his reputation, his fortune, all erased in the span of 5 minutes. He stared at the screen, at the face of the friend he had destroyed, and saw not the fury of a man seeking vengeance, but the calm, dispassionate precision of a God delivering judgment. "You took my name, my work, and my future," Leo's voice echoed in the silent theater. "I'm just giving it back." The screen went black. The house lights came up. The theater doors burst open, and uniformed officers began making their way down the aisle toward the stage. Julian didn't run. He simply stood there, a statue of ruin, as the world he had stolen fell to pieces around him. Leo Vance, in his cold, quiet bunker, leaned back in his chair for the first time in 7 years. He shut down the monitors, severing his connection to Silas Vane. He had not reclaimed the company. He had no desire for that poisoned chalice. He had immolated it, using the recovered funds to establish a new foundation, the Aura Trust, dedicated to funding ethical and open-source technological development, the dream he'd had in a garage all those years ago. He hadn't just destroyed his betrayer. He had reclaimed his own legacy from the ashes of Julian's lies. He was not Silas Vane, the vengeful phantom, nor was he the broken boy Julian had cast aside. He was Leo Vance, the creator. And for the first time in a very long time, he was free to build again.